Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. Today we look at a man who in 2018 was in the slums of Sierra Leone helping those less fortunate than himself. A man who's had spats with Stephen French and Ross Barkley. A man who's been described by judges in Liverpool as one of Liverpool's most enigmatic and puzzling crooks. It is none other than Sam Walker, the self-confessed career criminal with an astonishing story. From an early age, Mr. Walker's criminal career had already begun. He would rise to prominence during his drug peddling days. Originally from Liverpool, he rose to fame as part of a group dealing heroin and crack cocaine on the streets of Holton. The criminal gang had made up to £2,500 a day selling drugs in Wines, Runcorn and all the surrounding regions. Yet the gang's activities were apprehended in an undercover 6-month police operation called Operation Strikeout, which resulted in the seizure of £12 million worth of high purity cocaine, as well as many luxury cars, extensive amounts of cash and very expensive jewellery. A total of 30 people, 20 from the Holton area and 10 from Merseyside, were arrested, where more than 200 officers launched dawn raids in January of 2009. This event was what led Mr. Walker, who was 26 at the time, being the last accused of the gang to be put before the courts, where he pleaded guilty to 4 counts of supplying a Class A drug in court. He also had a previous conviction for drug offences. In 2009, 11 of the 15 charged pleaded guilty at Chester Crown Court and were jailed for between 1 and 3 years. It was said that Mr. Walker was snared in a car with others, dealing heroin and crack cocaine to an undercover officer who was acting as a junkie, and on 2 different occasions. When Mr. Walker found out about this, he pleaded guilty on the second day of his trial. The sentences handed out to the gang totaled more than 30 years. Residing on Marlborough Street, Vauxhall, the Liverpool Echo said that Mr. Walker was making a name for himself in the local underworld, and he had once posted his mobile phone pictures of himself smoking cannabis in his jail cell on the internet, only to be rumbled by the prison authorities later that day. Police believed that the dealers operating in the 2 towns on Merseyside's border could have earned up to £2,500 a day selling heroin and crack cocaine. The sophistication and the organisation that Liverpool Gangsters had in comparison to local dealers made it so tiny boroughs were easy markets for them to control. Sergeant Ian Allen from the Cheshire Police Dedicated Drugs Unit said, "We set out to target the supply networks in the area and take out the street level dealers. Because we are so close to Liverpool and Manchester, we have a lot of mobile dealers coming up to us and setting up with the vulnerable local users. Once we started to scratch the surface, we found out a lot more about the higher reaches of the drug supply chain into the area. This operation has led to a lot of people being convicted and sent to jail, but we also worked with the more vulnerable people we encountered. With the help of the local drug action team, we got 7 users into treatment, and they are still there, so we are combating the problem and helping to resolve it for the future." Mr. Walker's story continues after he served half of the sentence of 4 years and 8 months and was released on licence from HMP Liverpool in May 2012. Yet his return to society was only temporary, for he found himself re-arrested after being stopped by the police on the 9th of June 2013 for driving a BMW down King Edward Street in Liverpool city centre, despite not having any insurance and being disqualified from driving. The police said he had failed to comply with parole conditions after not reporting to probation service and searched the Garston area in particular in a bid to track him down. Furthermore, it can be noted how Mr. Walker was cleared in the February 2013 at Sheffield Crown Court of being involved in a plan to smuggle drugs and a mobile phone into Doncaster prison, whilst an inmate there. after which he unveiled a black t-shirt bearing the slogan "Not Guilty" beneath his jacket. However, he was subsequently charged with driving a Ford Mondeo on Park Lane West, Bootle, without insurance and was disqualified on the 3rd of April 2013, as well as leaving a threatening voicemail message on a policeman's answering machine on the 22nd December 2012. The court was told that this message intended to cause the officer or another person distress and anxiety. At the close of a short hearing on the 5th of August 2013, magistrates ordered Mr. Walker to serve an extra 5 months in jail on top of his drug sentence for the threatening message, with a 4-month sentence being given for the driving offences, which would run concurrently along with an extra 14 days for obstructing a police officer. In December 2013, Mr. Walker found himself amid another series of crimes that related to being part of a house raid, where a man involved in an armed robbery told the jury he was handed threatening letters in prison warning him not to grass on an alleged sidekick. This man was convicted criminal Ashley Udu of Rockfield Road in Anfield, and he gave evidence at the trial of Mr. Walker. Mr. Walker was accused of being one of the 3 men who raided a Runcorn home equipped with imitation guns and spoke to the prosecution witness at Chester Crown Court after earlier admitting his role in the raid. However, Mr. Udu claimed that he was pressured into the mission by Mr. Walker over a £10,000 debt, where 3 men wearing balaclavas and armed with Beretta air pistols struck at the home of Dad Kevin Beach in June of 2013, with one delivering a blow to his head as he tried to force him out. Additionally, jurors were shown handwritten letters that Mr. Udu claimed were sent to him by Mr. Walker whilst the pair were on remand in Old Course Prison. The first of these was said to have been delivered by a third party in September of 2013 and warned Mr. Udu to remember what happens to grasses by reading, "You have said all this shit in the police statements, calling me a gangster, and I'm involved with guns and drugs. Then you're gonna go around saying you and me will end up fighting. Listen mate, the moment me and you start fighting, I'll be straight on the phone and sending someone to your mum's address to turn her life upside down. You only need to look back at my last court case and remember what happens to grasses on that one." On the second letter that Mr. Udu claimed was from Mr. Walker, he apologised for threatening his mother and said they should talk about the case to get it sorted for both of their sakes. There was also a third note that claimed Mr. Beach had been given cash to lie under oath so that the case will be kicked out, and this note read, "My mate has given Kevin Beach 5 grand and is going to give him another 10 grand after he gives evidence. He said, when he stands in the dock, he is going to look at you and say, 'Ash, what is he doing here? I know it's definitely not him.'" Mr. Udu, who had 13 previous convictions including robbery and assault, claimed he was also sent a bogus defence by Mr. Walker, which would have pinned the robbery on others. Mr. Walker denied aggravated burglary and possession of an imitation firearm with intent, and having any involvement with the incident, as well as writing the letters. Furthermore, Lloyd Morgan, who was defending Mr. Walker, accused Mr. Udu of trying to frame Mr. Walker by concocting the letters after Mr. Walker refused to lie on his behalf, further commenting by saying, "When you and he were remanded in Old Course, you told him what happened and he asked you what had gone on because he knew nothing. You confessed to him that you had been using Sam's car and that you had picked up 2 people and went to Runcorn looking for a graft, and then you decided to burgle someone's house. What really upset you was when you asked Mr. Walker to lie on your behalf and say he never loaned you his car. You made wicked lies up about Mr. Walker because he wasn't prepared to play ball with your lies. Eventually, jurors found him not guilty on aggravated burglary and possession of an imitation firearm with intent on the 19th of December 2013. Mr. Walker had made a comment in his defence when he told the court that Ash was a scumbag and had tried to frame him saying, "Ashley is a robber, that's what he does. I'd be surprised if you could find 2 brain cells in his head. I'm not a robber, I was a drug dealer." Both are occupations, criminal occupations, but occupations, and they are completely different. He also went on to tell the court he had abandoned being a criminal when he was in prison at the time of his son's birth, and insisted that he had been with Mr. Udu earlier on the day of the attack and went to Crosby Beach when Mr. Udu had driven a BMW that Mr. Walker had hired, as Mr. Walker was disqualified from driving. The arrangement with Mr. Udu was that he could borrow the car after dropping him back near to his child's home, and Mr. Walker managed to convince the court that his DNA was only found on the balaclava thrown out of the BMW during the raid because Mr. Walker had used it for paintball. Mr. Walker also went on to tell jurors that no way at 30 I'm going to commit an aggravated burglary and get 15 years. It makes no logical sense. I might as well have just stayed selling drugs, but I chose not to. In the end, it was said that Mr. Udu would be sentenced at a later date after admitting aggravated burglary and possession of an imitation firearm. Time passed until the 7th of February 2014, where Mr. Walker found himself yet again in front of Liverpool Crown Court to enter his plea to 2 charges, both dating from December 2012. He pleaded guilty to being in possession of a Class A MDMA drug, otherwise known as ecstasy, but denied a separate charge of being in possession of a counterfeit currency, which had a trial set for the 31st of March 2014. As he left the courtroom, Mr. Walker, who was of no fixed abode, but whose last known address was in Garston at the time, was heard to say audibly, "That'll be another not guilty then." Yet it was later on in the same year when Mr. Walker continued to face the consequences after being arrested by police when he was recognised walking along Temple Lane at 4:30 AM on the 22nd of December 2012, where he was chased and arrested and found to have 10 ecstasy pills on him, as well as having 11 fake £20 notes. However, he denied having any knowledge that the notes were fake and said in his trial in August 2014 that he had sold a laptop and a BlackBerry phone to a man he had met in a barber shop on Lodge Lane and had been paid £500 in fake notes, which he had counted but had no inkling to see if they were real or not, and he did not know they were not real until he was told by the police. Nevertheless, Lee Bonner, who was prosecuting, said that was a lie, and it only took 2 hours for the jury of 5 men and 7 women to return a unanimous guilty verdict, causing him to blow out his cheeks and shake his head. After all, he did make an overconfident claim during his previous trial of how he would get away with the offence. Mr. Walker was given an unconditional bail, but was told to return to face sentencing in September the 10th, to which Judge Norman Wright warned him that the fact he was given bail was no indication of the sentence he would receive, saying, "Possession of counterfeit currency ordinarily would attract immediate custody. That's the position you are facing." It can also be noted how the jury had not been told that he already admitted to possession of the ecstasy for which he is waiting a sentence. The judge, Norman Wright, commented on this when he told the jurors the defendant was stopped by the police officers who believed he may be under the influence of drugs and found 10 ecstasy tablets on him. It's right you did not know about that because it's totally irrelevant to the issue under your consideration. Yet this issue was not over, for Mr. Walker escalated the situation by missing his court sentencing and therefore going on the run. Despite a warrant being issued for his arrest, Mr. Walker still appeared voluntarily at the Crown Court days later with a sick note explaining his non-attendance due to gastroenteritis. That meant he was not fit to attend court. Judge Wright also said that the investigation should take place over the circumstances of the sick note being made and instructed police to make inquiries with the doctor, to which he added, "I can't see why the doctors can't be spoken to in relation to this certificate and its coming into being." Eventually, Mr. Walker was handed a 12-month sentence for possession of counterfeit currency and 2 months for possession of a controlled substance. Some further notable comments made during the trial include how the judge was urged to pass a suspended sentence by Mr. Walker's barrister, Lloyd Morgan, who said his client wanted to turn his back on crime and wanted a career change, and had expressed a desire to help young offenders end their criminal ways. Mr. Morgan also went on to say how Mr. Walker has received custodial sentences after custodial sentences, and it doesn't seem to have done much good at all. It clearly doesn't appear to have done society much good at all either. While this is a case that attracts an immediate custodial sentence, in my submission, it will just be giving this defendant and society more of the same. Yet Judge Wright said the impact of the counterfeit currency on the economy generally meant that the immediate prison sentence was warranted, and described Mr. Walker as the sort of person who would know people who would know people who would have access to this sort of currency. The judge told him, "Having given your anxious consideration to the submissions given on your behalf, I cannot accept them. There has to be an immediate custodial sentence." Hence, Mr. Walker was finally placed behind bars for these offences. "2014 was not just an eventful year for Mr. Walker due to these trials, but also due to an altercation he had with the England footballer Ross Barkley. It was said that Mr. Walker, who was 30 at the time, had sent a tweet to the then 20-year-old Everton football star and World Cup hopeful, which read, "Inbox me your number, you little rat. You know what this is about, so don't play stupid or your footy career will come to an end." It was believed that Merseyside police had made contact with Mr. Barkley following the threats, but the sportsman declined to make a complaint. At the time, this would have been a crucial moment in Mr. Barkley's career, for the England manager Roy Hodgson was looking to select the final 23 for the World Cup that was taking place in Brazil. Mr. Barkley demonstrated his prowess with 45 appearances for Everton in the stellar season and scoring 5 goals. This had helped the Toffees to 5th place in the Premier League, 1 point behind Arsenal and within touching distance of the Champions League football for the next season. Eventually, it was said by sources that Mr. Walker and Mr. Barkley had had discussions in a high-profile Liverpool nightclub, The Playground, a popular wag hangout frequented by Strictly Come Dancing winner Abby Clancy, Alex Gerrard, and was frequented by many celebrities. However, CCTV footage was soon leaked which showed Mr. Barkley being punched after having a conversation with another man in the Santa Chapito's bar while celebrating Everton's 4-2 victory over Leicester City. Later, it was stated that the member of staff who had been leaked the footage had been sacked, with a spokesman for the management of Santa Chupos on Slater Street saying he was aghast that the footage was made public following the 1 AM assault. In response to this, the bar's management team acted quickly to discover how the film had been released, and after a meeting, decided to dismiss the member of staff who was believed to have recorded it on his phone and forwarded it on, with Santa Chapito saying they were hugely disappointed and doing everything possible to help the authorities. Further comment from the spokesman consisted of saying, "We take privacy of anyone in our bar extremely seriously, and what has happened is very disappointing. In the first instance, it's very rare that any altercations happen in the venue. We're a friendly bar, and this is not something that happens all the time. It's very much an isolated incident. We'll work with the authorities to help in any way we can now. We found out how the footage was made public and acted quickly to remove the person responsible from the company. He will be losing his job." A tweet was also put out by Mr. Walker at the time, which read, "Got to say, Ross Barkley did have it coming to him. Getting banged out again last night by one of the lads. That's what he gets for thinking he can go round trying to blag the lads' birds, the little rat. Far too many footballers and boxers in this city who think they can go round and try and grip any of the lads' birds when they are out in town drunk. It's only a matter of time before somebody does something bad to them for it." Said that he was the victim of an unprovoked attack by a stranger who approached him, whilst his solicitor said in a statement, we can confirm that Mr. Barkley was a victim of an unprovoked attack by a stranger who approached him on Sunday evening. Soon, Merseyside police had commented on the situation by confirming the force had received unsubstantiated information from a third party about an alleged threat towards a 20-year-old man in South Liverpool. It was also added by the spokesperson that officers have visited this member of the public and discussed the information with him. As a result, no further police action is required and no formal allegation or complaint has been made. Everton declined to comment on the situation, but a spokesperson for Mr. Walker added, "Reports of an incident between Sam Walker and Ross Barkley have been blown out of all proportion. Any dispute there may have been has now been resolved." Judge Everett said he had originally detected a slight change in Mr. Walker's approach compared to when he appeared on a video link at an earlier date, and went on to state, "You are 33 now, and your record is dreadful. There really just isn't any other way of describing it. Here you are at 33. When you look back at the last 15 or 16 years, you have spent most of that time in prison. Here you have really spent the best part of your adult life. You have thrown it all away. You have spent all of your time in and out of prison." Additionally, the judge continued to say how it appeared doing prison terms was absolutely nothing to Mr. Walker, adding, "You've done it before and you're perfectly able to do it again." Contrastingly, he commented on how prison terms were also for the benefit of the public, to keep Mr. Walker away from them, whilst also asking Mr. Walker, "You may want to reflect on that and ask yourself, is that how I want to be perceived in the future, as somebody the public wants to shun and avoid?" The judge also told Mr. Walker that when he said the drug matters would be dropped at an earlier hearing, as they would be a waste of court time, your reaction was, you wanted the police to be showing up for planting drugs, and your initial view was that I was only doing this to prevent the police from being shown up. Furthermore, it was said that he would be facing disciplinary measures for contempt of court, to which Judge Everett stated how he was not going to get upset or offended by what was said, but was in fact saddened by it, and further commented by saying, "I was rather saddened by it if you think the judiciary are in cahoots with the prosecution and police in some kind of way. I'm one of the most fiercest critics of the prosecution and the police when they get things wrong." The judge said he did not know Mr. Walker's background, but perhaps he did not have a good start in life. Mr. Walker interrupted the judge and told him, "I've had a good life." When told to be quiet by the judge, Mr. Walker continued to say, "You're wrong though. I've got no excuses, and don't think the world is against me, and I committed these crimes." Judge Everett then told Mr. Walker to be quiet again, and said he is the one who is talking, and he must listen, and then continued on to say, "If you have a good life, it's even worse. I see people who come from very difficult backgrounds, and they commit offences because they haven't had chances in life. If you have come from a very good background, and a decent background, then that is worse because you have made these choices and have taken it down the wrong path, and you had an advantage that others hadn't had in life. That is not a good thing. I have to sentence you for what is appalling driving, nothing more and nothing less." The judge then went on to detail the dangerous driving that Mr. Walker had done, which consisted of coming off the motorway and going through a residential area where traffic had to try and avoid him. He went on to describe the scenario by saying, "It is utterly astonishing that nobody was injured or killed. You and they were all indeed very fortunate in that regard. You could have been killed in truth, but if you kill somebody, you will be facing a very long sentence now." And the judge was right, for he went on to say how the maximum sentence for causing death by dangerous driving was 14 years, and Mr. Walker would have been near the top end of that. However, the maximum sentence for dangerous driving was 2 years, and hence Judge Everett sentenced Mr. Walker to 20 months in prison. This only enraged Mr. Walker and caused him to start shouting and storm out of the dock, to which the judge told him, "Off you go, see you later," and mentioned how he would continue sentencing without him. Mr. Walker then burst out with shouts like, "Little paedophiles come to this court and destroy people's lives and get a community order," and he also made a serious allegation towards the judge, who then ordered Mr. Walker to be escorted down to the cells. Eventually, Mr. Walker was brought back into the dock, since the judge had said that he would be brought back into the court shortly before 1 PM, where he may be sentenced for the contempt of court and handed a consecutive sentence. David Woods, who was defending, addressed Judge Stephen Everett, and the judge went on to say, "When I sentence the defendants, generally, judges ignore comments that are made in the heat of the moment. But I mean, accepting for a second that he appeared to be showing a slightly different manner, he did not. He started to rant at me and suggest that the courts don't treat paedophiles in the same way, and he completely lost it. The question is now whether or not I will deal with him for contempt." Mr. Woods attempted to defend Mr. Walker by saying he had a number of things on his mind which were in fact possibly mistaken, and that Mr. Walker initially thought that the sentence that he had been given did not include the discount for his guilty plea. He also said that Mr. Walker felt very strongly about the fact he had never claimed he did not have a good upbringing and had never used his background for mitigation, and that this caused him to lose his reason a little bit. He continued to say he does not hold the view that public policy with regards to sentencing in matters that have got nothing to do with him. He accepts, perhaps, he may not have been or may have been right, and decided to bring that into it at the heat of the moment. He understands, Your Honour, and does not want people to be shouting, even in the heat of the moment in the court of law. They are my instructions with regards to the matter. Then the judge said he would allow Mr. Walker to address him. So Mr. Walker said, "You've given me the chance to speak frankly. In these courts, right, only a couple of months ago, there were dirty little paedophiles," to which the judge cut him short by saying, "Stop and sit down. Stop and sit down. I'm going to make myself clear now. If I wasn't clear enough for you, I'm giving you the opportunity whether or not you want to apologise for what you said or not. Do you want to apologise or not?" Mr. Walker replied by saying, "I honestly don't feel any of my views deserve an apology. If that deserves me getting an extended sentence, then fine." The judge retorted by saying, "I don't want to hear your views on sentencing policies." After an outburst from Mr. Walker, the judge said he's had the opportunity to consider whether he wanted to apologise. He behaved disgracefully, rudely, and clearly in contempt of court. All he wants to do is express his views. He doesn't give two hoots about how he should behave in court. The judge then went on to say he will now consider whether he passes a consecutive sentence for contempt, and Mr. Woods said he had made representations to the limit of his instructions he had received from his client, but asked the judge to take into account the length of the contempt when making his decision, and that this was the heat of the moment situation. Mr. Walker, who during his trial had waved a copy of the newspaper containing a story about a sex offender being spared jail, was trying to make the point that, in comparison to his punishment, paedophiles were being given lighter sentences, such as community service. He continued to be adamant and refused to apologise to Justice Everett, and was given an additional 3 months for contempt of court, then a further 6 months for a second outburst. Mr. Walker further commented on the situation by saying, "Nonces come to this court, they destroy people's lives forever. They don't get jail. Yet I get jail. Where the fuck is the justice in this? There is no justice for these victims of paedophiles, and that's why every time I see them in jail, I punch their heads in every chance I get. I have to dish out the justice because you don't. Give me any sentence you want. I don't give a fuck." Judge Everett also dismissed the suspicion by Mr. Walker that there was a police, prosecution and justice conspiracy against him, stating, The world has only been against you because of the crimes you have committed. The sad reality is, he appears to have spent most of his adult life in prison. What a waste. He's throwing his life away. In the end, Mr. Walker's sentence was later reduced to 23 months on appeal. After he got back to his cell, he realised the errors of his way and cleverly sent a letter of apology to Judge Everett for his comments. – 2017 found Mr. Walker getting into an online feud with another notorious Liverpool gangster, who was known as Stephen French, aka The Devil. You can find the story about Mr. French in our UK Crime Legend playlist, so make sure you go and check that out. The feud consisted of the two trading a cocktail of insults and allegations in a heated Facebook battle. The pair were once in jail together, and during this dispute, they branded each other as liars and ridiculed their respective reputations as city hardmen. It was believed to have started when Mr. Walker questioned why Mr. French had chosen to speak out about his alleged Savile experience at the time instead of before, since the Echo had revealed police were investigating claims Mr. French may have been assaulted by the paedophile Jimmy Savile while he was a child. In a lengthy post, Mr. Walker said, Mr. French says, he, referring to Mr. French, says that they, the authorities, would have believed him 40 years ago, and then hundreds of victims would have been saved. Well, if you was that concerned about the victims, then why didn't you expose him when you wrote your book? Savile was still alive then. However, Mr. Walker did not stop there. He sparked a series of new messages during July and August of 2017, in which he branded French a disgrace, before moving on to post several images and recordings supposedly of the high-profile former criminal and campaigner. There was even an image that was a mock-up of Mr. French in a Teletubby costume. All of these messages were even encouraged to be shared by Mr. Walker, which led them to attract hundreds of comments and likes, whilst one video received more than 1,500 views. In response to this, Mr. French posted a series of replies, including 2 recordings of his own, which saw Mr. French dismiss Mr. Walker's allegations as lies.
These people want to talk about hate, dark and despair. So let's talk about hate, dark and despair.
Mr. French wrote, "My regular friends and followers, you are going to have to excuse me, but I have to answer this man. I'm sorry if you are bored with all of this, but this guy has lost his mind, so I address him on my page. People are worried I am not okay, so judge for yourselves." Then the 57-year-old added a few days later, "I'm telling him to take down his whole page, apologise for all the lies you have told about me, and got other people to tell on his behalf, and I will forgive him. I will never talk of him, and I will never shake his hand, but I do offer him unconditional forgiveness. If he can do as I demand, I am not asking, I am telling him. If he cannot do that, it's fine too." Yet it was said that Mr. French and Mr. Walker had each challenged each other to settle their dispute face to face.
What am I going to apologize for? What am I going to apologize for?
Both were high-profile Merseyside criminals, with each other having earned notoriety for their past actions. Mr. Walker's actions included those described in this documentary. As for the former martial arts champion, Stephen French, he was nicknamed the Devil because he struck fear into the drug dealers he taxed and tortured, although he was jailed for 3 years in 2013 for possessing a knife and threatening a business associate with an imitation firearm. Before that, he claimed the road to Damascus-style conversion, and it had put him to his end of his wrongdoing. And once again, he promotes himself as a reformed character. This is surprisingly similar to Mr. Walker himself. Relating to settling the dispute face to face, it was said that there would be a fight in October of the same year in Wrexham due to a countdown that Mr. French, who had begun to go by the name of the Fighting Preacher, had put on his profile, along with the poster featuring headshots of himself and Mr. Walker. This was as well as a boxing ring with the catchphrases, "Whenever a problem arises, you do 3 things. Face it, fight it, and finish it." This only led Mr. Walker to go back on Facebook to deny the claims, where he said, "I didn't want to comment on this freak Frenchie again, but I need to clear up a post he's put up. Stop trying to use me for attention and publicity by putting silly pictures up of us both, just because you're trying to pretend you're selling tickets for a fight between us in October. Who do you actually think you are, saying you will sell her thousands of tickets? No one is arse, lad. You're the only one saying that for attention, to use me as your talking point on Facebook. You had your chance when I went to London last week and you didn't turn up. Every place you asked me to go. Since then, it seems as though the dispute has been put aside and no further actions have been taken by the pair, thankfully. Hopefully Mr. Walker and Mr. French can come together in the future and help the younger generation learn from the mistakes they made. Alongside the Stephen French spat, it can now be seen how Mr. Walker had found himself in a negative light since he had been held over an allegation of violence at a bar he was about to fly to in Dubai on holiday. He was escorted from the departure and taken to the police station since it had been claimed that he was involved in an altercation at the Botanic Gardens bar at the Baltic Triangle on Sunday, July the 9th, 2017. He was then arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm and taken to the St Helens police station for questioning, although he was released pending further inquiries as the police continued to investigate the incident. The police further commented on the situation by saying, "We can confirm that a 34-year-old man was arrested on Friday the 21st of July at Manchester Airport on suspicion of conspiracy to cause wounding at Botanic Gardens Bar, Newburgh Street, Liverpool, on Sunday the 9th of July. He was released from St Helens police station under investigation on Saturday evening, the 22nd of July. This just goes to show how Mr. Walker has always been involved in incidents that get him into trouble with the law and affect his life. The beginnings of Mr. Walker trying to turn his life around can be seen back as far as March 2017, when he paid for 8 rough sleepers to spend 2 nights in a luxury Liverpool Shankly hotel. He told Liverpool Echo that he wanted to give something back to the people in the situation that, quite frankly, we could all find ourselves in at any point. He went on to say, "I put them up there because I can. I'm in a position where I can come out of prison and I can still live a stable life. Many people don't have that luxury. Every single one of us are really only one step away from being made homeless. It could happen to any of us. I just wanted to show these people who may have lost a bit of faith that there are still people out there who are thinking of them, and we aren't just sweeping them under the carpet." Mr. Walker paid for 2 executive rooms for the 8 men and women, and Nicola Twigg from Rainhill, one of the people Mr. Walker had invited, said how words couldn't describe how much the gesture had meant to her. She said, "It has been like something out of a fairy tale story. We would never have expected something so extravagant of anyone, and I still can't believe we got to say at the Shankly. It's something you always dream of, but when you're on the street, you don't think that could ever happen." Stuart Thompson had also been sleeping on the streets since he had been released from prison, and told the Echo newspaper, "On a normal night, I would be on the street just long enough to gather enough money for a gaff canister so I can light a fire in my tent. You're always in fear of being robbed or not being able to shake off the cold, so to be able to have a hot shower and a sleep in a warm bed is just amazing. What Sam Walker has done for us is out of this world. He has such a good heart." In addition to kindly providing them with accommodation, Mr. Walker also treated his 8 new companions to a day of shopping to replace their wet clothes, and said, "We all take these things for granted, sleeping in a warm bed, wearing clean clothes every day, but for some people, that's not just the reality. A spokesperson for the Shankly Hotel said, "People from all walks of life are welcome at the Shankly Hotel. However, in common, all hotels, and in line with the strict legal guidelines, it is procedure for ask for names and nationality of all the guests. Furthermore, these details are essential for health and safety reasons, in particular fire regulations." The reason for these comments was likely because there had been issues at the reception when Mr. Walker was trying to book the rooms for these people. Either way, this just goes to demonstrate a more charitable, kinder side to Mr. Walker that should not be overlooked. It can be further seen, 2018 was the year when Mr. Walker made his most grandest gesture to charity, and made an attempt to change his life around. This all began with a 4,500-mile journey to Sierra Leone, where he would find himself providing aid to the impoverished members of Freetown. His voyage consisted of a flight in a private plane from Belgium, from which he would find himself taking a 14-hour Spain to Morocco boat crossing, and then spending up to 3 days driving through the Sahara Desert, only for this to be seemingly unnecessary, since he could have spent a few £100 on a flight that would have got him to his native Liverpool to Freetown in less than a day. So why did he go through all this ordeal? Apparently it was due to the fact that he was wanted by Cheshire police and had failed to answer bail on a relatively minor charge of driving while disqualified. While he may have taunted the police via social media during his journey, the police also had a laugh because police sources consulted by the Independent mused, "People are strange, aren't they?" He does seem to have gone quite a strange route because I'm not sure he would have been nicked at the airport. If there was a concern a defendant would leave the country, their details would be sent to all the ports and airports straight away. But if there isn't that concern, usually it would be left for the local force to deal with it. Mr. Walker documented many parts of his journey through posts which are said to have been a guide for the fugitive who wanted to leave the UK, and the video consisted of him apparently leaving Britain in a passenger seat of a hired light aircraft, laughing about the armed Belgian police packing some serious artillery.
These guys in Belgium are packing some serious artillery, yeah.
And jumping a boat to Morocco. He ended the video with a final taunt and hearty laugh where he said, "Better luck next time trying to catch me when I go out of the country, Merseyside police."
Better luck trying to catch me when I go out of the country next time, Merseyside police.
So what truly were Mr. Walker's motives? He commented on the situation by saying how he fled because he feared he was being jailed for driving whilst disqualified, which could have prevented him from delivering a container full of donated goods to a slum in Freetown, the capital of Sierra Leone. Yet the experience, however, baffled police source, reporting to the Independent, said, "It's a strange one. He appears to have fled the country when he didn't exactly have the worst charge hanging over his head. If convicted of driving whilst disqualified, he would have probably got banned from driving for a year and got a fine. Instead, he's gone to Africa and put taunting videos online, and now he's going to get jailed if he comes back. He seems a complete moron to me." Even Mr. Walker was apparently aware that his chances of getting arrested for the charges were remote. However, it was inevitable that his actions were seen in the positive light by his fans and followers, who described him as an absolute legend and a modern day Robin Hood, who had defied the law to do a lot of work for charity. This was despite his past that could be politely described as checkered. His initial social media posts on Twitter showed him in a British setting complaining about being watched by undercover detectives.
He's been trying to follow me. Now we're in pursuit of them.
Taunting police with old footage of me and the lads, doing stunts in fast cars, confronting a local house robber, and calling somebody else a supergrass nonce. Yet, when arriving in Sierra Leone and starting to change his life around, it can be seen how there were posts that showed him talking about how a fresh water pipe had been fitted, so that no woman or child has to ever risk their lives again by drinking dirty sewage water in the slums. Mr. Walker further commented on the situation of the area by saying, "Why can't charities do this? I've come by myself and done it," even going so far as to accuse charities of robbing money that was donated to help those people. Mr. Walker continued to post more videos of his time in impoverished locations, such as a video where he is being surrounded by grateful slum dwellers, one of who said, "We are happy that our brother Sam has come to help us with water and sanitation. We thank God for him." In fact, Mr. Walker seems to have been very well received by the government of Sierra Leone, as his Twitter page had a post which said, "The new president, Julius Maada Bio, is good and for the people. I met his wife today." Another video posted by Mr. Walker in June of 2018 was of him in what looked like a government building and said, "I'm just sat waiting to see the Vice President of Sierra Leone and tell him my plans." Mr. Walker had established a friendlier relation with the local police than he had with officers in Britain. Mr. Walker said in a video of him in the company of armed officers, "Thought for a second they were going to open fire. Luckily, they were security police who had been seen by myself in a taxi and thought I was potentially in danger because it was at night." Whilst it may have seemed positive for Mr. Walker in Sierra Leone, it can be seen how some people back home were not happy. As the negative comments started coming in online, people wrote, "Pocketed a little picker mix, jumped the ship to Africa for a few likes, the things people do nowadays." Merseyside police said that they would not elaborate on what it was already in the public domain about Mr. Walker, and the Cheshire Police said it was aware of Mr. Walker's online video and was reviewing it. If you would like to see more of Mr. Walker's video or the footage he has, go and check out his channel or his social media pages. During his time in Sierra Leone, Mr. Walker showed off video tours around mines where he claimed to be doing charity work. Footage showed how he also visited former blood diamond mines and sent images of gems being weighed on a scale and encased in a handkerchief, which provoked comments from Liverpool's Underworld, with one crook posting online, "Get in touch, dickhead, or I'll ruin ya." Sierra Leone was rocked by a civil war for 12 years, with the profits from so-called blood diamonds being used to fund armed trades. And to this day, the country still depends on the jewel trade. So why did Mr. Walker post these images? It turns out that his purpose was for a documentary, which he commented on by saying, "As part of my documentary, I went to a rebel-held diamond mine. I wanted to experience everything firsthand, just like the people of Sierra Leone have had to. That is why you will see me at a diamond mine. It's all for my documentary." Yet these charitable actions of Mr. Walker came to a temporary halt when he returned to the UK. His return involved him sneaking back in on an undetected helicopter flight and immediately taunting the police by booking a £250 night Hilton hotel opposite Merseyside's 500 police officer HQ, only for him to be rearrested. A Merseyside police spokesman said that on the 23rd July 2018, "We arrested a Liverpool man who was wanted on a court warrant for failing to appear for a driving offence in Cheshire. Samuel Thomas Walker, who was 35 years old, was wanted by Cheshire Police following an incident in Cheshire on the 4th of April 2018. Matrix disruption officers from Merseyside Police assisted colleagues at Cheshire Police in their efforts to locate Mr. Walker, and yesterday he was arrested at around 11:20 PM in Crompton. He has been remanded in custody to appear at Cheshire Magistrate Court this morning. Before moving on to Mr. Walker's more recent activities, it is interesting to note that he did an interview with Vice about his time in Sierra Leone. Whilst Mr. Walker mentioned many pieces of information that have already been mentioned in this documentary, some anecdotes truly display Mr. Walker's personality and the justification for his actions of helping those that are impoverished and can be found in this documentary. When asked, how does a convicted drug dealer from Liverpool end up going to the slums in Sierra Leone, Mr. Walker said, "My granddad is from Freetown, and my great-grandfather was one of the first slaves granted his freedom there, hence the name Freetown. In the slums, people have nothing. They literally build their homes out of rubbish and waste. You can see amputees everywhere. During the Civil War, rebel troops would attack civilians, and their calling card would be a hacking off a limb as a warning to others. There are women who have been gang raped. One former child soldier, called Streets, told me that when he was 7 years old, his village was attacked. The rebels put a gun in his hands and told him, if you don't go and kill your mother and sister, we will kill you. He did it. Because of the poverty, these victims now live shoulder to shoulder with the people who did it to them. Streets said, I forgive them for what they did to me, but how did I forgive myself? From Mr. Walker saying all of this, hopefully you can understand where his desire and desperation to provide aid come from. But it does not stop there, because Mr. Walker was asked about when he had begun to seriously consider lending a help to the needy. He said, I remember meeting a sick baby girl. Her name was Aaliyah. Her eyes were rolling rapidly from side to side. It was awful. I'd never seen anything like it. Her mum said the hospital was 30 miles away and she had no money to get there. So I took us. I remember the baby squeezing my finger on the way there and thinking, I've got to help these people. When we reached the hospital, the doctor came out and asked for my money for the treatment. I gave him what I had, but when he realised I was English, he asked for more money, so I gave him my Rolex. The interview continues on, and when Mr. Walker was asked about what happened to Aaliyah, and how much the donations he had chosen to give due to her fate that day had cost, he said, Aaliyah died. I returned the next day and I sat there in the corridor listening to the mum screaming and crying. I promised myself that I would return as soon as I could with an aid container to help others. I don't want to give an exact figure. I set myself a target of getting a parcel, clothes and toys, sweets, food, water, up to 200 homes. I brought 2,000 water bottles. I wanted to make sure everyone we met was given something. I see the Red Cross in a lot of places, and they are the only ones on the front line. But apart from them, I don't see any other of these celebrity-backed charities. They don't exist out here. An interviewer went on to mention Mr. Walker's reputation on social media and questioned him on it, saying how people on social media had accused him of using the aid container to smuggle drugs or wash dirty money. To which Mr. Walker stated, I have my own legitimate security businesses, which is doing well and pays a salary. I have served my time for all my previous offences, except an outstanding driving one. I've seen comments from people saying I'm smuggling drugs, diamonds, or washing dirty money. It's ridiculous. Thousands of people are having their lives changed in a positive way for the first time in years. The long-term goal is creating a completely transparent charity where all the receipts are published online and videos show people getting the aid that they are paid for. It was also mentioned during the interview how there was a video on Mr. Walker's Twitter showing him threatening to shoot a port security guy, and Mr. Walker explained the situation by saying, I had paid all my port fees in advance, yet the guy in the video demanded another sum, which I paid. The next day he wanted more cash. I told him he was breaking the law. He says, I'm above the law, and I lost it. I said, but you're not above a bullet, are ya? And I shouldn't have said it, but I was desperate. It's one thing ripping off the system, but another keeping aid from people in the slums for cash. Even when I met the Vice President of Sierra Leone, he said, I have no say in the ports. I can waive government taxes, but the ports have their own way. Yet Mr. Walker said he did not mind a bit of corruption that the police of Sierra Leone had, such as paying a prison officer £1,000 to smuggling a phone, or to get off a driving offence, as long as normal walking people don't get ripped off. This was in response to a question about comparing the British police to that of the Sierra Leone ones. One final net-worthy thing to take away from this interview is Mr. Walker's response to a question: have you given up on crime for good now? Mr. Walker replies to this by saying, you can't change overnight. You have to unlearn bad behaviour. But what's happened in Africa has accelerated my progression. For the first time in my life, my mum and my son told me that they're proud of me. It's given me a new sense of purpose to make change and do something positive. Hopefully this goes to show a side of Mr. Walker who desires to seek the path of redemption for his past crimes. In more recent times, Mr. Walker has found himself being brought in front of the courts numerous times for a range of reasons. These crimes included 2 high-speed police chases, one charge for smuggling a smartphone into prison, leading to him being jailed for another 33 months. Surprisingly, this was a little over 18 months since he had brought smiles to the faces to the children and the families of Freetown, when he risked his own freedom to supply fresh water to the village that didn't have any. When he returned home, he found himself back at Liverpool Crown Court, and it was here Mr. Walker was found guilty of stealing a £160 replacement car window screen after a misunderstanding with the owner. Even after he was asked to drop the charges, Mr. Walker was hit with a further 12 weeks in prison, to which he replied, "Nice one," to the judge upon sentencing him. This incident was around the 28th of June 2020, where it was said in court that he had distracted the owner of the superfast autoglazing in St Helens before making off in a Silver Rover MG ZT. Although he informed the jury that he had always intended to pay and only fled because he spotted police looking for him. Yet Mr. Walker was caught by officers from Merseyside Police's Matrix unit on July the 21st, and he later posted pictures of his injuries he claimed were inflicted by the officers during his arrest. Even though he was taken to Cheshire Magistrates Court, he was again released and led police on a 100 mph police chase around Speke in a white BMW, which he crashed. However, he escaped, but this was not the only pursuit he would get into. For a 55-mile-hour chase in a Ford Focus in Kensington on August the 11th followed, which ended when he clipped the car on the street of Old Swan with children playing outside. Ultimately, Mr. Walker found himself locked up after police stopped and arrested him in a Mercedes in Helsby, Cheshire on August the 21st when he had 4 ecstasy tablets. During his trial over the windscreen, Mr. Walker claimed a friend paid £200 cash on his behalf for it just a few days afterwards, but prosecutors said nothing was paid until May 2019, almost 11 months later. This is what led to him being convicted of theft. Despite repeatedly telling the jury he didn't think it was in the public interest for him to be on trial over such a minor matter, and that proceedings must have cost the taxpayer thousands of pounds. The response to this sentencing by his fans portrayed the belief that Mr. Walker was a victim of mistreatment at the hands of the police. A female supporter posted that Mr. Walker was in his friend's dad's car and would have stayed and paid, but it was the fault of the police not being hot on his heels that he fled. She stated online that this man gives away thousands to charity, even when he's in prison, so why would he try and steal a £150 windscreen? It was quite clear throughout that the police forced the witness to turn up and pursue this, even when he said he didn't want to because he had been paid. So it wasn't theft. Clearly, the police have some vendetta against Sam. In all honesty, all that can be said now is that we hope Mr. Walker makes good on his promise and continues to help those in need, although this certainly is very difficult, especially since he found himself being transferred from prison to prison. Eventually, Mr. Walker reached a point where he became one of the most prolific and enigmatic criminals of the UK criminal underworld, with allegedly more than 45 convictions after being arrested on what has been more than 130 offences. Even some of the judges were shocked by his crimes that Mr. Walker had committed, and were only attempting to persuade him to realise the error of his ways and realise that he has a much more important mission in life and is destined to much greater things. Thank you for joining us today. What are your opinions on the crimes committed by Mr. Walker? Would you have went on the run to help people in the slums of Sierra Leone? Please let us know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like and share. And if you're new to the channel and want to see more Street Crime UK content, press subscribe and hit that bell button so you can join us on the next video. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, stay safe.